Welcome back to Knowledge is Kings, guys. I am Kings, and today I want to show you how I made my lighted epoxy sign. Let's get to it. So I sent my woodshop logo to the Laser Kings here in Arizona, and they cut it out for me. Now I could have cut it out on my CNC, but my CNC can't get as sharp and detailed in the corners as their laser can, especially since my logo has very sharp, steep angles throughout. Plus, I wasn't sure which areas I wanted lighted and which I wanted to remain wood. This way, as their laser doesn't remove any wood like the CNC does, I can still choose later. So they put blue tape over the whole thing before they sent it to me, and I had to take out the sections I didn't want. Then I set it on a form I use for an epoxy table in case any epoxy leaks out. I mixed my epoxy with a white pigment as I wanted the LED light to be diffused. I didn't want to be able to see any of the individual lights. I didn't know which LEDs I was going to be using yet. Once I had it mixed, I poured it into the open areas. When I had it filled, I put another form on top to keep it flat as it cures, and added a bunch of screw cases on top for weight. Once I peeled it off the forms, I was disappointed to see tons of low spots in the epoxy. At first I thought it must have leaked out, but there wasn't any epoxy on the form or my table. And then I wondered if there had been large trapped bubbles that I missed and I didn't notice them after I was done pouring. But it became clear later that there were very large voids in the plywood that absorbed the epoxy. So I built a form around my sign using vinyl trim and poured a thick layer of epoxy over everything. Now this is my slow cure epoxy. I use this in case there are more voids in the wood that need to be filled in, and this will give the epoxy time enough to slowly fill those voids before it cures. I wish I would have done this the first time. I had never used plywood with epoxy before, so I didn't even consider voids. After it was poured, I could see that wherever the epoxy was thin in the first layer would now have a different color of white than everything else. And it turns out, as it cured, the difference was exacerbated. Oh well, you'll have that on these big jobs. Like I said, I should have used a thick layer of slow cure epoxy right from the off. I tried getting the tape off earlier and it wasn't coming off, so I sent it through the drum sander to get the tape taken care of, and it all flattened out. You can see there are areas that are not being sanded, which means it isn't quite flat yet. I send it through until everything comes out with sand marks on it. Once I have it sanded down and made an outline on the back edges of 2 layers of MDF, I traced it on a plywood piece to create the backing to screw the LEDs into. I cut it oversized and then screwed it onto the sign. Then I took it over to the router table with a flush trim bit to trim the plywood flush to the sign. I have the LEDs snapped into brackets that are screwed to the back piece, which was a very long, tedious process in which I had them on and off in different configurations until I got what I wanted. I should have used a thicker plywood because the screws were coming out of the back, but I didn't have any thicker plywood to use. So I decided to put this up in a podcast room I built a while back just to see how it looks. These LEDs are controlled by my phone and have a myriad of different color options that are preloaded and a complete custom color, fading, blinking, changing option. You can see the voids that appeared after it was sanded. Look how big that gap is, so it soaked up a lot of the epoxy. There were other voids that eventually got sanded away. You can really see the color differences where the original gaps were, which is really disappointing, but if the colors are changing fast, it's hard to notice. So other than that, I'm really happy with how this turned out. I'll leave a link in the description of the LED strips that I used, unless I can't find them or I forget. I'll also leave a link to the epoxy I used. That's all I have for this video, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like as it really helps out the channel, and consider subscribing so you won't miss out on future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Oh, I like that.